broadcasting now, just so that we can start letting people come through. So people will start trickling in. Good morning to those who are very, very prompt, 1 minute early. It's always nice to see. I like that whenever we do in-person events, you always see people sneaking in 5 minutes late, kind of and sitting down at the back. But with webinars, people tend to be quite timely with things. So guys, and just so that that people are joining us, I'm sure everyone is very, very familiar with Zoom. But if you open up your chat panel, there will be some things that we're engaging with you on, and we'll have questions for you. So if you can open up your panel and then change the default option to all panelists and attendees so that we can all see that. You are seeing on your screen myself, so hello everyone, I'm Ashby, and then we've also got Lindsay and Lindsay, who I'll introduce more formally in a minute. But I'm sure we're all very thankful for everyone joining us today that it's no longer 34 degrees in London. Lindsay, you're based in Newcastle, aren't you? So you've been a little bit cooler?
It is raining currently where I am.
There you go. That's the joy of the north, isn't it? As a southerner, it's got plenty of rain. I think we're still about 29 degrees here, but it's better than yesterday.
Whoa.
Yeah. When we met yesterday, you definitely looked less dishevelled than I did. I think we met at like the end of the day, and it was like 4 o'clock and very, very hot. So yes, so yeah, we'll just allow people to continue coming through, and then we will launch into this. Those of you, it would be great, anyone joining, if you can just introduce yourself and say which organisation you're from. I know we've got a few people from different HR teams on here, and we will share the chat around afterwards. So there's a couple of questions we're going to be asking you to get your input in terms of what your organisations are doing at the moment and challenges you're facing, so that we can do a bit of shared learning, as well as obviously tapping into Lindsay and Lindsay's expertise. So do introduce yourself on there, and then feel free to share as we go throughout. For those of you who this is the first time joining us, and you might not have been on our series before, this is part of an overarching series. We specifically are doing a sub-series of webinars around equality and diversity in the sector, because it's obviously quite a hot topic at the moment. We will send around the recording of our previous one, but this one today is focusing on gender diversity and equality and how we can help achieve that within our sector. So similarly, and I've talked with Lindsay and Lindsay before, our sector is quite male heavy in terms of leadership, so we will touch on that. But for my agency, I guess alongside all these webinars that we've been doing to help support the sector, we also look after the day-to-day recruitment. And help with job searching and things like that. So diversity is a big element of what we're doing, and we're working with our clients closely to advise on that. So if you need any support in how to make your jobs more appealing to people from different backgrounds, then please do get in touch with me afterwards. And I know everyone has had recruitment as a pause on their agendas, but it seems to be coming back to life a little bit now. So feel free to get in touch with me with any upcoming recruitment needs. In terms of today, so I am being joined by Lindsay and Lindsay from 50/50 Future. You'll see them on your screen at the moment. So 50/50 Future is a great organisation, and their mission is to achieve gender equality in the workplace through providing training and advice to organisations across many sectors. They provide them with specialist support on how to achieve the gender balance, and they also have some really amazing facts on their websites about the benefits to organisations of having gender diversity. So I would strongly advise, after this I will send around the link, that you check out their webpage and have a little look at what they're suggesting there, particularly if you're trying to influence upwards. That's quite a handy one. So Lindsay and Lindsay, I'll let you introduce yourself. They've got the same name but different spelling, so we'll talk.
Picked.
So we'll talk through your backgrounds in a bit more detail once we move on to the slides. But it's really great to have you, and thank you so much for coming and joining us, and also uplifting my knowledge around gender diversity. I'm really excited about today too. So I will move into sharing my screen. Just for those people that have just joined us, as if you can open up your chat and change that to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see what you're typing. And if you're able to introduce yourself and your organisation, that would be lovely. We will have questions as we go throughout. So let's switch into this. So you should all be able to see this. I feel like that I'm quite a pro at technology now, but you know, this is the time it could all go wrong. So 50/50 Future, that is who is joining us today, and I will let you both introduce yourself.
Fabulous. Shall I go for this, Linz? Or?
Ahead.
Okay. So yes, as mentioned, Lindsay and Lindsay from 50/50. Appreciate that isn't the most diverse start for a D&I training consultancy, but you know, we do have Northern Irish and Northeast, so you know, it's a start at least. It is. So yes, we run a training and consultancy company based in Newcastle, although now obviously with the wonder of the virtual platforms that we're using, we're now getting a lot more access across the UK and beyond, which is great. In terms of what we do, so as Ashby mentioned, we have a specific focus on gender balance. However, we are very much conscious of the fact that this needs to be a more holistic approach to diversity and inclusion. We're going to refer to diversity and inclusion as D&I for reference, but we find it's really important to take that holistic approach. And so by doing that, what we try and do with our content, although our experience and our expertise lies within gender balance, we do try and make it transferable across all areas of D&I so that it's easier for you to pick up and put in place in your organisation. For us, it's really about creating that culture in your workplace that's inclusive to everyone. So although a lot of our examples and a lot of our knowledge is around gender, we try to make it as intersectional as possible so that it really does become more about the individual, and anyone at all can feel comfortable and welcomed in your organisation and feel as though they can thrive there. So it's not really about 50/50 bums on seats as such. It's more about equal opportunities for absolutely everyone. So that's our ethos. That's how we approach things. And in terms of gender balance as well, just to make it very clear from the start that we appreciate there are many different genders, but when we talk about gender balance, it is about the traditional male and female. And we don't tend to take an equitable approach to gender balance. So it's not just about women and women only. We are inclusive of men and all colleagues so that it really does become part of the wider conversation. Like we say, really getting ingrained and embedded into your workplace culture. So I hope that has given you a bit of an insight into how we are going to be approaching this today. If you've got any questions on that, please feel free to ask. In terms of our background, just a tiny little bit on that, we aren't experienced, particularly with the charitable sector. We have ran a community interest company before, so we're aware of, you know, raising funds and being in that space, but we aren't from the charitable sector as such. We are actually, our background is in tech and STEM, so that's how it came about with 50/50, because there's so much imbalance within the tech sector and in STEM, and most of the conversations that we were having within our networks all became boiled down to either skills in the pipeline and diversity as well, especially gender. And from our experience being in a very male dominated sector, we've got a lot of experience to draw on. From our understanding, I think the charitable sector is the opposite way around, where it tends to be quite female led, but from our understanding, I think there's more men who take on the senior role generally. So we'll come on to that a little bit later on, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think in general, the workforce is slightly more split towards kind of female, but yes, leadership roles tend to, the predominant amount still tend to sit within men. So yeah.
Awesome. Ashby, if you just move forward, I'll start us off by really just going through our 7 steps to better balance. So hello everybody, other Lindsay. Lindsay Britton's giving you a great intro, so there's no need for me to add anything further to that. What you can see on your screen here is our 7 steps to better balance. So this is our methodology that we've created over time from the experience of working with different organisations and companies. This methodology kind of underpins our approach to diversity and inclusion, and for us it's about taking that holistic view to understand really where the key challenges and barriers lie. And for any strategy to be robust and really have the impact that it needs, everything needs to kind of interlock with each other. It's all well and good, and I'm sure Ashby you can maybe relate to this, that a lot of companies that come to ourselves will pinpoint recruitment as being a key challenge for them, that they can't get females to join their tech team, or they can't get men to join in with their more HR marketing roles. But actually, when you look at the wider picture and break down and start interrogating things like company cultures, looking at the reputation, the first impressions, it all has a part to play. So it's not about fixing one area, it's about really giving each stage and every aspect of the business the attention that it deserves. So what we're going to do this morning is just run you through our 7 steps briefly, and this will kind of give you a framework for a little bit of a self-audit, I suppose, that you can go away and have a think about either the workplace that you're part of or the departments and functions and so forth that you run. So Lindsay and I will kind of bunny hop in between. By all means, make it as interactive as possible. So if you do have any questions throughout about a particular area or something that we've said, please fire them into the chat box throughout, and I know that we'll all be keeping an eye on that to pull on them. And then after we go through this, again, we're going to ask you some questions all about knowledge sharing and diversity of thought, so best practice, and see how it goes. So if I pass over to Linz, and if Linz, you can just run through first impressions as part of our 7 steps.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's obviously with our time that we've got with you today, this is going to be very much a whistle-stop tour, obviously, but each one of these, there's so much depth that we can go into, and part of our audit process would do that. But yeah, we'll give you the highlights today, but hopefully it'll be enough to at least give you a bit of food for thought anyway. So beginning with first impressions. Obviously, when you're looking at either new clients, new employees coming to find out more about you, what does your company say in terms of diversity and inclusion? Where are they going to go to? Well, they're probably going to go to your website, I would imagine, first of all. These have the ability to make or break a decision with somebody. I think if, depending on what you are portraying on your website, make somebody, whether that's consciously or unconsciously, feel as though they can be part of that or not part of that, they can belong there or not. So really looking at your website, and it's really hard when you're in a bubble of your organisation, so it might mean that you get somebody who's impartial, whether it's a colleague who works for a different department or someone external to help you do this, but just getting a different perspective on what's on your website. So in terms of the language on there, obviously we want it to be welcoming and friendly, but sometimes you can, when you look on websites, there's some very strongly male-coded words or very strongly female-coded words, and they may even appear in different sections of the website, depending on what they're about. But we need to make sure that we're using more gender-neutral language throughout, and there's some great language decoders that can help you do that, and I'm sure we'll come on to that a little bit later on as well. But making sure so that your copy is inclusive in the language, but also your imagery. Is it all females on there? Do it in caring roles and being supportive? Because if it is, then that might be a barrier to men applying for your roles or feeling part of the organisation. And can people from different backgrounds see themselves on your website? So really making sure that you go through and have a look at all these things and make sure that they're really consistent throughout. It's a really good place to start. And if you do have any great company policies or benefits about flexible working or shared parental leave and perks like that, make sure you put them on your website so people know about them and can make an informed decision about whether that suits them from the offset. Also, employees are your biggest ambassadors for your company as well. So what are they going to say about your company to other people, to potential candidates who are going to come through? And even if you think that your employees are going to give you a glowing report and feel really valued and feel part of it, who are their networks and their circles that they're telling that to? Because if everybody that they speak to are women in the charitable sector, you're not going to get much diversity coming through that way either. So I think it's really important that everybody expands their networks as well.
Lindsay, sorry, what are your thoughts? You talked about website and imagery there. I mean, a lot of organisations over the last couple of years have been using wording, positive action wording around, we encourage people from different backgrounds or minorities or genders to apply for this role. What are your thoughts on organisations going a step further and actually putting, we have a D&I working group, we have policies to support women in work, and going that kind of step further in their job adverts?
I think that's great. I think when there's a generic statement, anybody can whack that on and it doesn't really have much depth to it. If you can really make it authentic and show exactly what it is that you're doing, how you're investing in this, I think it goes a long way and people can really relate to that when they come on.
Great, thank you. Sorry, that just jumped to mind.
Again, social media would be another thing to keep an eye on as well. We know that different people use different social platforms, so ensuring that you use as many as possible, especially, we know there's a big difference between older people and younger people, where we find them, how we reach them, and ensuring that that message is conveyed consistently across them as well. So I'll better back over to you, Linz, for the next one.
Why, thanks. It's like a well-oiled machine here. So I'm going to touch on leadership. And really for us, any diversity and inclusion initiative, it needs to be owned at the top and then led by the bottom. And I don't know if it's the same in the charitable sector, but sometimes there's issues around getting buy-in from senior management, board, other stakeholders involved. So in terms of your leadership and trying to not convince them, because they should, ethically and morally it's the right thing to do, so they should be on the same page. But if they're not, a really great way to do this is with your business case. And I know that we'll maybe touch on that, Ashby, later on to go through it in more detail. But when we think of then the management positions or management colleagues in your company or organisation, I'm going to cover a few points of maybe what way they can approach diversity and inclusion to really make sure it has the impact that it deserves internally. So first of all, things like educating ourselves and having that learning mentality is really important. We need to absorb as much information as possible, particularly when you consider that if you're going to launch a new service or product, you're going to do a lot of market research. It's exactly the same with diversity and inclusion. If you're going to input an agenda into your workplace, then you need to do your research too and get clued up on what this is. And there's fab companies around that provide training resources. You can access webinars like this morning. So there's really no excuse not to go out and SWOT up on areas that you're maybe not so sure on. Another thing that management really need to do is listen. So a really great way to do this internally is by holding things like focus groups, listening groups, sending out surveys, getting some feedback from colleagues that you work with. But then more importantly, being proactive based on that feedback and putting together strategies in place to really react effectively and not so it falls on deaf ears, so to speak. Also, lead by example. So there should be resources and budget really assigned to D&I initiatives, and there should be investment really into this area. And it's about getting involved as well from a leadership perspective, that If there are internal or external events happening, you should be there, you should be seen, you should be heard, you should be attending, and really setting the tone so that everyone appreciates that diversity and inclusion isn't just an HR tick box exercise. It's not down to one particular individual. Everybody plays a role and everybody needs to be involved, and that needs to be role modelled throughout. Another thing is communicate. So we touched on this with the website there when you and Lindsay were discussing about putting policies and so forth. You can't over communicate, in my opinion. Make sure you're telling everybody what you're up to, whether that's your stakeholders, your C-suite, whether that means that you're putting it out publicly on whatever social media is with regards to telling your customers and suppliers about what you're at. So make sure that you're getting that across and that everybody's aware of what you're doing. And then lastly, with leadership, make sure you're measuring the impact of what you're up to. So set yourself benchmarks, understand how you're going to hold yourselves accountable, and then just constantly review, reiterate, understand what's working really well, what impacts that's having, but also what's not working really well. And that's fine. It's a journey. And things like diversity and inclusion, it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. We're not going to magically fix gender imbalance with doing one webinar online or by doing a self-audit. It definitely takes time and investment. So they're my top tips in terms of leadership.
It's interesting what you said about measuring there, because I think it's always something that people come to afterwards, don't they? Like they get some good results and they're like, oh, we should have probably measured this. But I think so there's a mix of obviously some HR people on here, but also fundraisers. And we've definitely seen a rise in the last year of trusts and foundations and even some corporates now that are requiring statistics of the diversity amongst your leadership and amongst trustee boards. And although they're not putting it as a hard requirement for funding yet, I think as the market moves forward in the coming years, we will see that. So actually being able to measure it now and setting up your processes to do so will position you ahead of other charities potentially applying for the same funding pots.
Just measure everything. Even if you don't know what you're going to do with it, measure it. And if you can backdate too, that's a really good way of understanding where you sat, and then you can analyze based on that. So we'll touch on that when we move on to the likes of recruitment. It's a really good process to be able to look back on and reflect, but do measure everything, look at your data and really interrogate it. Yeah, Linz, I'll pass back to you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good, it's a great segue actually, thanks. And if we're going to look at culture, taking a real honest look at whether our workforce is actually diverse, because I think a lot of times we think, yes, it is, because we can see maybe some different faces or we can see difference within the organisation. But looking at our data to see where that diversity lies is really useful. So a lot of times with larger organisations, in our experience, they'll say, yes, we're diverse, but when we push them on it, all of the diversity are in the lower paid jobs. And then the higher up the company you go, the whiter and male it gets. And again, with functions even, so departments. So obviously our background is in tech. We see a lot of times that the tech department, again, white and male. If you look at HR, customer service, marketing, they tend to be female led. So seeing where the diversity actually lies, I'm really aware that
there's some awful, I tried to mute myself because I can hear the feedback while you're speaking, Linz, but I don't know if that's affecting everybody else too.
No, I'm not sure. I'll take those out. I thought
that's better now.
Better.
Last week we had someone from Italy speaking and they had crickets in their background the whole time. So I think if anyone joined this week and last week, they'll be thankful that even if there's a bit of feedback, at least there's no loud crickets, so don't worry.
It might be seagulls, that'll be the only other thing.
I'll keep myself on mute.
Great. Yes, so in terms of the workforce itself, just really looking at where that diversity lies and looking at the data to see whether it actually is that diverse or not, because sometimes when I ask organisations, they'll say, yes, we are diverse, but actually it's just because they've got a few more women than what they've seen in other organisations, or they have some different nationalities of people, and then they think, we've done it, we've nailed it, it's sorted. So yeah, just being really honest about that. In terms of building that inclusive and diverse culture as well with wider employees and colleagues. So your team building activities, so taking a look at them, are they truly inclusive? There's not going to be a silver bullet where there's one particular activity that everybody wants to join in. You're always going to have an activity where there'll be someone who it's not for them. But if you have a wide range of activities on offer, then surely there'll be something for everyone. And we want to make sure that, again, this is fed from the wider colleagues as well. This isn't just management deciding this will be a good idea and people will like this. It really needs to be fed from the bottom up and led by them as well and what they would like to see. We've had some great virtual team building suggestions that we've heard from different organisations as well, where they've had a Ministry of Fun where they do cook-offs and Rate My Plate and different activities that aren't your typical pub quiz, which I'm sure everyone's sick of during the pandemic now, but just trying to think outside the box a little bit on what could be inclusive. And again, with celebrating different traditions and celebrating diversity within your organisation, firstly, are you doing that? And if you are, well, that's great. And make sure, again, that that feels as though it's fed from the wider colleagues as to, you know, what's important to them, what would they like to celebrate, what do they want to see. And if you are celebrating in that way, that it's okay to ask questions that come from curiosity. I think that's really important so that people don't feel as though they can't ask someone about something because, or they're going to offend them. I think it's really important to have those open conversations, as long as you're not, you know, being assumptive and making judgments and you're just genuinely being curious, then that's great. We should foster that. When it comes to certain celebrations, so such as Pride, International Men's Day, Women's Day, and Black History Month and things like that, if you are celebrating those things, that's great, but just to develop that a little bit further, rather than only celebrating LGBT plus when it's Pride and only celebrating Black History Month on that month and things like that, how can we thread that throughout the year? So try and make it as intersectional as possible. So for example, if you are holding a panel session for your International Women's Day, and I'm definitely not saying this as a tick box exercise by going down each one or going around the diversity spectrum, ticking off each box, but just being really mindful. Could you include a transgender woman on the panel? Could you include a Black woman on the panel to share their experiences? And just making sure that you are being as intersectional as possible so that they're visible to other people. So I think that's a good starting point anyway in terms of culture. So I'll let Lynn's tag in again for the next one.
Ashby, is there anything you want to ask off the back of that, or can I run?
No, I don't think so. I think it's what you said about celebrating is, I think as a small business myself, it's not always something that I'm on top of in terms of, you know, all of the different celebrations. And although we're an inclusive culture, one of my team members is Muslim, so we make sure we recognise Eid and things like that. But I suppose it's staying on top of all of them, and actually kind of apathy towards these things isn't enough anymore. And also, I mean, so many of these celebrations normally include food anyway, so, you know, even at the very, very least, you get a more opportunity to have cake. You know, sorry. So no, that was all I would have to add in with that really useful thoughts onto you then with progression.
Cool. I'm going to go slightly off piste, and I'm going to start with reputation, if that's all right. So there's a stat flying around at the minute that 56% of women actively seek out progress of diversity and inclusion when they're applying for a new role. So going back to what you said earlier about companies publicly sharing more than just that standard copy and paste ED&I statement, 100% share things like your parental leave policies, that your maternity policies even, don't keep them hidden away, locked in the intranet that even employees currently can't find. But definitely shout about what you're doing. And even if you're at the beginning of your journey, it's still important that you are getting the message out there, that you understand the importance of diversity and inclusion, that you want to have that inclusive workforce, and these are the things that you're going to be putting in place. And I know, Ashby, yourself, you've been great at this, that you boldly set out your own aims when it comes to diversity and inclusion and what you were going to do as a company to really make impact, and holding yourselves accountable for that. So that is key, and I would advise everyone to really have a think about what they could do from that respect. Also,
sorry, just to jump in with that, and what I will say, so through establishing that policy that we have in place now, where we anonymise CVs, we commit to doing these kind of events. We've set up a small charities networking group for people to learn best practice and share best practice. I think what guided, it's been a big learning process, and one of the things that candidates from minority backgrounds were saying to me during that process while we were formulating that was, they feel uncomfortable actively asking hiring managers, interview panels, or recruitment agencies, how diverse is this organisation? You know, that makes them feel like they're on the back foot because they might be being perceived as difficult or bullshit or things like that. And so I think the more that as an organisation you can do to make it clear, this is how important it is to us. We have working groups, we have catch-up Fridays where we discuss different minority issues. The more open it will be. I mean, obviously as an agency we can manage that now, so all of our briefing takes into account that, but if you're advertising directly, it's definitely something everyone should be doing, is going above that kind of standard. We encourage applications from different backgrounds.
And that hits like the nail in terms of that inclusion piece. It's about making sure that those individuals that do want that information don't have to put themselves in an uncomfortable position to seek it out, which is vital, really. And a good way to do that, so when it comes to reputation as well, try and again have that impartial perspective. So ask people for their opinion on your brand. I don't know if it's the same in the charitable sector, but I imagine there's definitely some similarities where quite often we will find organisations, their Glassdoor, I'm sure you've heard from it from a recruitment point of view, so when you're going for interview, you can go on Glassdoor, it's kind of like a Trustpilot for that company to find out what they ask, what people's opinions of them are. And Glassdoor is a really interesting one because people will bear all, warts, ugly, good, bad, in terms of their thoughts and views of a company's position. And it's really important that you understand what people are saying, because that information out there publicly can really affect how you operate, and it can affect things like your hiring process. So we've had companies that have put fantastic D&I strategies in place and they couldn't understand there was still a missing piece of the puzzle. They went on to Glassdoor and found a number of negative reviews, all from quite a while ago, but they'd never been addressed by anybody. They were able then to jump on, respond to them, update people with what they've put in place to manage some of the issues and challenges that have been mentioned. So again, that impartial perspective is key. So have a look out for things like that yourselves, but also ask people in your networks for their honest opinions, hold surveys, and really get into the nitty-gritty of how you come across, because as we say, it's really difficult when you're fighting the fire of your own position every day to look outside and see the bigger picture when you live and breathe it. Another thing with regards to reputation is just touch on your networks. So it's really important to expand your networks and not really fall foul of constantly engaging with the same individuals. So a great example of us this morning, the charitable sector is not one that we have much experience in, but we're hoping that we can learn and get some pearls of wisdom from you folks on today. Also, we obviously have a specialist slant on gender diversity because that's our background. We can understand and sympathise with some of the issues faced. Our learnings are transferable across all the diversity remit and spread in terms of the intersectionality piece, but we don't profess to be experts on things like Black Lives Matter, for example. What we have done is joined every webinar that we possibly can. We've read as much about it as we can, and we've spoken to our network to make sure that we can really clear ourselves up and learn more, and we would encourage everybody to do that. So have a look at who you are engaging with and just see how you can really expand that, and ask people for recommendations, or if you're curious about particular areas, actively go out there and see how you can engage with those folks more. And then I think the other thing with reputation, just for me, is if you do have values within your organisation, make sure you're living and breathing them and making sure that they're public. they should be kind of your moral stance on how you approach everything. So it's really important that you portray them externally so people get a real feel for who you are and how you operate. And also you need to hold yourself accountable to them. So if something conflicts with those values, then you need to ask yourself whether it's the right thing to do or not. That's kind of my brain dump on reputation for you.
No, really useful. And I think in terms of touching on what you said of going out to those new audiences or new inputs, if anyone on here doesn't know where to start with that and would like me to introduce them to maybe another organisation that's doing things differently or whatever, just let me email. I'll send around a wrap-up email at the end and with the slides as well, and then you can always come back to me and I can see what I can do, and I'm sure Lindsay and Lindsay will have recommendations as well, so don't hesitate to utilise us as needed.
Yeah. Cool. Linz, can you touch on retention then?
Yes, I'll go through that quite quickly because I'm conscious of the time. But yeah, just to kind of reiterate what's been said around you know, policies and making sure that they're accessible to people, they know what they're getting, they don't have to hunt it out, don't have to feel uncomfortable. And like you were saying, Ashby, you know, really making people aware of what you are doing, so they already feel as though they know what they're coming into, they know what to expect when they get there. Because I think there's a huge disconnect that can happen where you could have done everything that you think was right to recruit someone, and then when it gets to the onboarding, if you are being inclusive up until that point and they get in there and it's completely different and you don't have an inclusive culture and they don't feel like they belong, they're not going to stay very long, are they? And I think when you're looking at things like job specs, just making sure that you're really clear about what the job actually is going to entail and what to expect in terms of the organisation and the values, because I know from our perspective, again, I'm sure there's a version of with the charitable sector, but in tech, a lot of the organisations where you go in, you know, the very informal, where people are wearing hoodies, they're on bean bags, they're on the laptops. If you've come from
the dream of the charity sector, that's the dream. I mean, some places do have that, actually. We've gone very snazzy in the recent years.
Well, it's a funny one, because if you come from a corporate background and then you haven't really been told that, and it's not really been reflected in your interview, and you rock up and everybody is hanging out, and it's a very different environment to get used to. Even something like that can really make you feel unwelcome and not part of something. I know that there's a stat that says 36% of new hires quit after being hired because it wasn't what they were expecting. So really managing expectations, and I think it goes without saying, but it is really important that people who feel looked after, valued, part of something, which includes the company's values as well, that they can relate to, they resonate with those values, that's why they're there, they understand them, you will keep them for longer, and they're not going to want to leave. And again, in terms of data, just looking at those patterns as well, so measuring everything, tracking everything, getting those exit interviews and getting that feedback from them. I think it could be really interesting, like you say, Ashby, when now that recruitment is picking up again, from the back of the pandemic, are there going to be certain organisations who have a massive drop-off of colleagues when they can get new opportunities because they haven't felt looked after during this time? So I think it's really important, if that does happen, and regardless anyway, that you are tracking this data, you're getting that feedback and really looking for patterns to see what story it tells about your organisation.
Yeah, agreed. I think we'll definitely see that drop off in terms of people moving on from charities, particularly as the market stabilises further. You know, we might see a bit of a dip at the end of the furlough scheme, but and equally in terms of, I know we're talking about retention and we'll move on to recruitment. So, but I'll do a quick non-relevant bit, but you know, if you're not looking after your recruitment processes now, or the candidates that are going through those processes because of sheer volume, because of redundancies or whatever, actually they won't apply 2 years down the line because they've had a bad experience with you. And, you know, if you don't retain your staff or you don't treat them well, they'll leave. So it's really important to get that as you said, Lindsay, communication. You can't undersell that.
Yeah, and you can see straight away then how all of these steps link in together very nicely, and that's why the holistic view is so important. And touching on that recruitment side, so this is probably one of my most favourite areas to look at when it comes to diversity and inclusion.
Remember not to badmouth agencies, okay? No one's in.
For my sins or not, I'm married to a recruiter, so I won't. I know there's some good eggs out there too. Recruitment is a beast, and there is so much that we can cover. And actually, we do individual sessions solely on recruitment because it's such a mammoth area. A few things to touch off, and I'll do a whistle-stop tour of this. Job adverts. 11% of roles pre-COVID were advertised as being flexible, which now we can see is possibly farcical because everyone's working from home. Those individuals that didn't have the option to work from home previously have now suddenly got the tech and all the requirements to do it. I think there will be a big shift on how that looks now that caring roles, responsibilities, work-life balances have all been affected and changed. I know that in my household, we have a 6-month-old little boy, and my husband has been on furlough, so he's been doing the majority of childcare, allowing me to work, and actually he'll probably continue to do that moving forward and take a couple of days a week where he can. So be conscious of what you state in your job applications or your job adverts, because people are going to be turned on and off depending on what they see. Another really important thing to do with your job ads is A/B test them, or ABCD test them. So have lots of different variations of the same job role, because they're going to appeal different formats to different types of people. So for example, your language, again, we've put some language decoders in the chat box for you to have a look at. Language is key. Make sure it's not too feminine heavy, make sure it's not too male heavy. You want those gender neutral terms. Some people really prefer bullet points, others like more of a narrative and story. So just play around with your job adverts and make a number of them. Even things like people, when we think about neurodiversity, individuals that are maybe on the autistic spectrum, they really want that essential criteria, so they know exactly what they need to hit, whereas others might be put off by that. So play around. Your interview panels need to be diverse, and you can do this in a number of ways. If the function hiring isn't diverse, look at pulling in other individuals from across the company. They don't need to be from the same team. It's that diversity of opinion and thoughts. So see who else you can bring into that process. And if you're a small organisation that maybe doesn't have the luxury or ability to really have that diverse panel, go out to your network and seek an individual that you trust the opinion of and ask them to come in. I know that Lindsay and I have sat in interviews of different companies to, again, give that different perspective and slant. When you're searching for candidates, think of where you can put job roles that you haven't previously, and think of where those individuals are. And to be able to do that, you need to understand who's applying for your job, who's not applying for your job, what channels are they coming through, and where you can potentially extend that to reach other individuals to widen that pool up. And then track and analyze every single thing. So look at your data, look historically who's applying, look at the job adverts, do a bit of an audit of those. How can you reiterate and adapt and try new things? And I suppose my final one on recruitment is really try and remove as much subjectivity and bias as you possibly can. Ashby, I know that you do anonymised CVs now, which is a really great step. Some people I imagine you're faced with come back to you and say, all well and good that your CVs are anonymous, what do you do when it gets to panel? Because that's shattered. Make sure your staff that are doing hiring are trained. You need to be doing things like unconscious bias training. It needs to be ongoing so that they can challenge their own biases, prejudices. So do that and make everything as analytical as possible would be my advice. Scorecards, understand what questions you're asking, why you're asking them, how you're going to mark responses, and judge your candidates based on merit, not on each other. I could go on for days. I'll stop there.
Really useful though, and some nice tangible things that I guess some are easy to implement, some take a little bit more work, but good to kind of get some pointers on that.
I think I'll bat back to you for our last one of progression links, and then
I'll be quick with this one so we can get back to having a wider discussion. But I think just like recruitment, we need to take the same stance with progression as well. So anyone who is in a management position that would be pushing people through progression routes should have unconscious bias training. We need to take the subjectivity out as much as we can. We need to make sure that the process is as inclusive as possible. Are your part-time staff getting the same opportunities to progress as full-time staff and things like that? So again, looking at your data, seeing who are in those higher management roles and who isn't and why. In terms of training as well, what training opportunities do you have? And again, are they accessible to everyone? Does everyone know what the opportunities are? Are they for them? We would tend to advise to steer away from equitable initiatives. So like sometimes they can work, women-only initiatives and things like that. They can work, but you have to get the narrative absolutely right, otherwise it can be counterproductive. So we would say use caution with that. We would rather have an inclusive process and system in place rather than using equitable approaches. And with regard to training, making sure that people are aware of what is available to them, what they can do, and how they can progress in the company. And mentoring would be another big one that we would advocate for. If you don't have a mentorship scheme in place already, it's probably something that you can look into. I know that with having maybe less visible women in senior roles, it can be something that people tend to go to as a first stop to have female to female mentor-mentee meetups set up, which are fine, and we see the value in that absolutely, but let's not forget all the other intersectionality as well. So let's mix it up where junior staff are mentoring senior staff, young people to older people in the organisation, and really getting that diversity of thought. And you want someone who is going to change your perspective, not agree with you all the time. So making sure that the people who are mentoring you aren't similar to you and who are maybe very different. And at first that can feel a little bit uncomfortable, but you want to have that challenge there. So yeah, just making sure that you are including men in that as well. There's a stat again, which has been a huge increase in the last year by 30%. That says 60% of male managers are uncomfortable participating in a common work activity with a woman, such as mentoring, working alone, or socialising. And I think it's because of all of these pressures that men might feel in that us and them divide, where they're just not sure how to interact anymore in case they offend, or you know, they've gotten to a point where it is really confusing for them. And I'm not surprised, but we really need to make sure that that gap doesn't widen anymore. So making sure that it isn't just about women to women and that's all that's on offer. It has to be about all colleagues being supported. I think I'll leave it at that.
No, that's great. I suppose, and that's the thing, isn't it, with all of these conversations around inclusion, is everyone does need to be included. Any majority groups need to be included in any conversation with minority, because you don't see progress without it. So yeah, really useful point there. It's always difficult to have conversations with people that don't just agree with you, though, Lindsay. You know, that's the hardest bit, isn't it? On that as well, actually, we've seen that one charity in particular have their CEO mentored by an officer level person to basically upskill their learning of what it's like to be in a slightly lower echelon of the hierarchy, effectively, and that's working really well and adding a lot of value to their kind of internal policy processes. So I'm a big advocate of that too. Now I've got some questions for you. I know we've got a couple of questions for the audience. So if you guys can get involved and maybe share some of your experiences with some of these questions, that would be lovely. Just so that we can kind of see what's happening in the sector, what you guys are doing, how you can learn from each other. But Lindsay, I also have some questions for you. So I guess why we're letting people kind of get involved or share their experiences with that. Can you just talk me through a couple of points? So I want to know, in terms of COVID and the impact on gender diversity, you see that happening, or you see happening. What key things benefits do you see coming out of the fact that we've all been in lockdown and the office environment's now changed completely?
I think very strangely, it's actually given us this unique window into individuals' lives that we don't normally get to see. So you usually come into an office or your place of work, wherever that is, your work environment, and you are taken, you know, even if you're being yourself at work, there's still a lot of your colleagues that you don't get to see. Whereas doing things like this, where you are actually in people's houses, if their children are running around in the background, even their pets and things like that, when you're having meetings, it really offers that unique insight into their lives, so you see them more as individuals. And I think that that's really made people be more conscious of inclusion, and knowing what challenges individuals are facing, because this pandemic has been so unique for everyone with the challenges that they may have. Managers and colleagues have had to really adapt and find out, well, what are your specific challenges in this situation, and what can we do to help you with that, to support your work, and to make you feel that you can manage in this situation. So I think that's really brought diversity and inclusion to the fore in a huge way. And I think for a lot of organisations, it really has shot to the top of the agenda for that reason. But then also maybe for some organisations, because they've gone into survival mode, it just hasn't quite got there. But in terms of gender, I think what Linz was saying before, about things like childcare and having, you know, a partner in the house, which, you know, you might not usually both be there at the same time, but enjoying that work-life balance, and maybe your partner then saying, well, I would like to have a bit more of that in future, so then everything doesn't necessarily fall on the women who may be the primary caregiver.
I can definitely see a big opportunity that the way that we work is going to change, and I think it really has to change moving forward. And I know that already organisations have, some of them have made some drastic steps. So I know one particular creative agency has completely restructured their business, partly because they've had to go into survival mode to get through what we're doing. But they've went down to a 4-day week, so everyone has an extra day off at home to have that work-life balance. But also you can choose whether you work from home or whether you go into the office, and just even having that flexibility will make it much more inclusive and open for individuals that it currently wasn't working for, or it didn't quite sit right. So I do think that there will, hopefully, it'll kind of demyth some of the issues and barriers that we face, the likes of women not being able to get higher positions because they need to be full-time. Do they really now? We've shown that everyone can be very productive from home. So I do think there's definitely an opportunity there.
And Kimberly in the chat's asked around, she's actually noticed that it's more women that perhaps have been negative towards other women. Is that something that you have had experience of, and how do you address that? And I think just in terms of, from my side, I sat on an interview panel last week, and one of the females we were interviewing said, we asked, you know, what would your manager say about you? And she'd say, oh, I'm really great, I work really hard, blah, 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 blah. She'd also say I'm a bit ditzy. And I just thought that's a terminology you would never use for a man. And I was really, I don't want to say anything at the time, but I was really annoyed about it, because I just think it's another, her manager was a woman who had said that to her, and, you know, that's difficult to navigate, isn't it?
Yeah, there's so much to go into with that one, coming down to stereotype, threat, and how we're even raised with societal pressures as to why women need to act or portray themselves in a particular way. And I do feel like it would be a common occurrence that we're told that women are more critical of women, and I think that's because often they feel like they need to have this persona of having more masculine traits in order to be more successful in the workplace, because that's where they see the senior positions. I think it really comes down to that wider education piece. We need to all be really conscious of the challenges and barriers that women do face in the workplace and the imbalance that exists. And once we get everybody kind of on the same page with that, then we can work out how to address them. And then it comes down to calling individuals out. So we shouldn't be afraid to say, actually, hold on, I'm not sure whether you meant it this way, but this is the way that I've taken this and I didn't quite like it. It didn't quite sit with me. I wanted to make you aware. That would be my thoughts.
I think it's a really traditional view of, women versus women, and having that feeling threatened by other women, where I think I'd like to think, and from what we see anyway, from the younger generation, it feels a lot more supportive and cohesive, collective approach than that, those traditional views of, oh, well, you must feel threatened by her because she's younger or she's attractive. And all of this plays into recruitment as well, and our biases. That we cover this in our inclusive recruitment session as well, where, very attractive women are less likely to be hired out of everybody. And that could be for a number of reasons, but I'm sure some of those things definitely contribute to that. But it's something that I would like to think is trailing off with the baby boomers, and the millennials are bringing in hopefully a bit of a different perspective to it.
Yeah, I think it comes down to a lot of the time, I use the saying a lot, hurt people. And if you've grown up in an environment professionally where you've had to fight tooth and nail to get everywhere, and you face discrimination from other groups, maybe it just naturally, stuff rolls downwards sometimes. We've got a couple of questions that have been directly asked of us, and so we'll just blitz through these. So someone said, how long does it take to implement these changes that you've talked about today? So just a quick one from both of you, and then we'll ask that final question we've had through.
There's no easy answer for that one. So one, it depends on the size of the organization. If you think of a multinational company, they have a bigger ship to turn compared to a smaller organization that's putting these strategies in place as they grow so that they can grow with them. So there isn't an answer. I mean, there's definitely things that you can implement straight away, but I don't think we ever can tick the box to say that we're done and that we have everything right. It's about consistently doing this, and it's something that shouldn't be forgotten about. Diversity and inclusion is now ingrained in your business throughout. So yes, it will take months to incorporate a robust strategy, but then you constantly need to iterate that and go forward with it. More than happy, Ashby, I know that you're going to send around our virtual drop-in sessions, so if you want to come on and chat to us one-on-one about that, or any questions, by all means do that. But things you can do straight away, it does take time.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot that you can progress with in 6 months. There's loads that you can do, and depending on how much you want to invest in it, and how far you want to take that, absolutely. But I don't think you can ever really say the job's done. It's always going to be changing anyway.
Great, okay. And I think we are literally running out of time. So that last question, it's done by anonymous, so email me, and then I'll get Lindsay and Lindsay to answer that via email with you. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much, Lindsay and Lindsay. It's been really, really useful. There's loads of stuff I've taken away from this as well. So thanks so much for joining. I will send around the links for those drop-in sessions that Lindsay mentioned, and the contact details as well, so you can get in touch with them directly. I think definitely really useful to use them for some training. If you've enjoyed today, please do kind of give us your feedback. If there's anything you want us to tweak, that would be great. And then our webinar next week is outside of diversity and inclusion, but on leadership and how you can lead teams, which will link in with some of the topics we've discussed today. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you again so much, Lindsay and Lindsay. Really appreciate you being with us.
Thanks for having us.
All right, take care. Bye.
Have a great day. Bye.
Yes.